Whoa, this episode definitely heated up. Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, we're going to be talking about season 1, episode 6 of Vampire Academy, Molnia. Wow, this episode was excellent. I thought episode 5 was really good and emotional. This one was as well, but in a different way. It does a lot of really interesting things, and we are going to talk about all of it. If you have missed any of my other videos talking about the previous episodes in the season, I will link that playlist for you up above. I'm doing individual recaps and reviews to each episode as I see it. And I feel like this is going to be on the longer side because a lot of things happened and I took lots of notes. We learn at the beginning of the episode what the Molnia is. It's the title of the episode, and it is a central piece to Rose's character arc in this story in some interesting ways. A Molnia is kind of a tattooed mark on the back of the neck that Dhampir guardians receive after killing a Strigoi. Rose is eligible for her first ceremony to receive this mark because she killed Mikhail after he was turned into a Strigoi in the previous episode. So we open with the scene of Rose coming in for this formal ceremony, and there's chanting and this whole thing, and then we see her flash back to all of these memories of Mikhail, their kind of boot kick, their friendship, and then killing him at the end, and she starts tearing up, gets up and runs away and is like, I can't do this because it feels like a violation of his memory. And it's really sad, but I feel like a great way to begin an episode after the death of such a loved character. And one thing that I've seen commented on my recap of the last video, which again, I haven't read all of the books, so I'm less familiar with all the details, but apparently this is one of the first truly significant departures from the books that the showrunners have made. Apparently, in the book series, Mikhail and Sonia eventually get married, whereas in the series, he ends up dying, which is quite different. I think it's interesting. I think it opens up possibilities for Sonia's character arc, and I'm going to reiterate, based on what we see in this episode, what we saw in the last episode, I sort of feel like we're seeing a villain origin story for her, perhaps. She is moving to the dark side of things, and I'm so curious to see where that's going to go. We'll talk a little more about Sonia later in the video. After that, we get a scene with Victor and his entire family. It's this kind of lovely domestic scene as they're preparing for the royal tour that Mia is supposed to be going on. But as it turns out, Mia can't go. She's in trouble. Because if you remember in the last video, I talked about how she used her magic against Zeklos, who is a royal, Jesse Zeklos, and that is now coming back to bite her in the butt. So unfortunately, she can no longer go on the royal tour. She has punishment coming for that decision. And so instead, Sonia is going to be going with her dad on the royal tour, trying to assist the way that Mia would have, even though she is in the midst of grief and dealing with a lot of really dark stuff in her life. If you started the episode thinking, this isn't going to go well, you wouldn't be wrong. While we don't find out what Mia's punishment is until a little bit later in the episode, I'm just going to talk about it here. It was pretty horrifying to watch. There is this sort of religious ceremony where they literally carve, I think, letters or runes or something into her hands because of the fact that she used her magic as a weapon against a royal. It's intense and pretty disturbing, but ends up jump-starting her character arc in some interesting ways. It feels like she's no longer willing to play by the rules if this is what happens to her, and she's going to make some different decisions. Again, we will get to that a little bit later. So this royal tour is happening. We've heard characters in the previous episodes talk a lot about the royal tour. They're going to Lisbon, they're going various places. We don't know a lot about it, but we know that only a select group of people get to attend. And towards the beginning of the episode, we are told by the Queen that the royal tour usually is about excessive indulgence, but this time there's going to be a caucus to decide the next ruler, the next royal heir. And we get this really striking image of Victor and Tatiana side by side. They are the two candidates, and this royal tour is really about both of them trying to get as many votes in their corner as possible. Something I find interesting is I mentioned in the last episode that it seemed as if white was maybe a color of death and mourning for the Moroi, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just a color that they use for certain kinds of formal events. I would be really curious to have this answered. They wore all white for the event where they were mourning death in an earlier episode, but they're also wearing white and blush pink and these sort of light colors in the party scenes on the royal tour. So I don't know what the colors are intended to imply. Maybe the reason they're not all in full white, it's a mix of white and flowers and like kind of a blush pink color. Maybe that's supposed to sort of moderate it. But what I think is interesting about the costume and color choices here is that everything looks very innocent and light and pure, but meanwhile, underneath the surface, there are a lot of very dark things going on, and that contrast is quite fascinating. One example of where we actually see this is when Sonia is trying to help out her dad, can't make sense of her sister's notes, and so decides to use her magic abilities to see people's auras. Now, what's interesting is I don't know that we knew previously that she could do this, that she could see people's auras. Maybe we did and I just missed it, but this is the first time I remember seeing it so viscerally. The difference between the Zekloses with these very dark auras versus Lissa's kind of golden aura is really interesting here, and I think again really contrasts with the clothing that they're wearing. That said, this scene had me concerned about Sonia. We see the black in her eyes again. I'm worried that her using her magic so much is going to harm her. She doesn't seem to be doing well with it. Meanwhile, Lissa, we know, got on the royal tour because she wants to find a way to investigate what is going on with her and know more about Saint Vladimir. So there's this guy, Adrian Ivashkov. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I don't know Russian, so excuse me for my pronunciation. But he is a known collector and expert in Saint Vladimir, who Lissa believes also had this spirit ability. So her whole point of going on the royal tour in the first place is to be able to meet with him and ask questions and get more information about what's going on with her. So she is angling for an invitation to his party, which is really difficult to get. She asks Jesse Zeklos. He's like, yeah, I can't do that. And she's like, fine, I'm gonna go talk to your dad then, because he has more power, I guess. The relationship between Jesse and his dad is hard to watch in this episode. We have quite a few scenes of his dad being incredibly abusive to him, including one scene where Jesse punches his dad first and then his dad like completely beats him up. And you can really see how the abuse that Jesse experiences at the hands of his dad just makes him angry and wanting to take it out on other people. And it's rough to watch. Now, it doesn't excuse any of his behavior. There are people who go through abuse and don't then take it out on other people, and he needs like a safe space and therapy, I guess. But in the meantime, he is quick to anger, he is impulsive, he makes choices that put other people in danger, and it is not great. But his dad is for sure a piece of work. One part of this that's interesting is that at the party, he ends up seeing Silver, who is the name of the blood whore that he was always meeting up with, and it turns out that she is there with his dad's business partner. He's clearly jealous. He talks to her and she's like, I like him. He takes me places. He's not ashamed to be seen with me in public. Unlike Jesse, of course, we know that part of this is the restrictions his dad has put on him, but I like the fact that Silver is standing up for herself and being like, no, you're not respecting me, you're not giving me what I want, I'm gonna do what is best for me. It's interesting. But then his dad saw him with her and he literally grabs him by the balls in like a really disturbing scene. There are, again, as I said, several sort of abusive, disturbing scenes in this, and he's like, these belong to me until you have an heir for our house, or something along those lines. And then, of course, as I said, his anger and his hurt at the way that he's been treated, he takes out on other people and is like, we're leaving right now with Lissa without the convoy, which of course ends up leading them into a trap where Strigoi attack them. So yay, Jesse. You need to get that anger under control and find a better way of dealing with this. There is a scene though in that Strigoi attack that I found very interesting, very telling, and also quite in line with other things we've seen in this season. In my video on an earlier episode, I mentioned the fact that when he was having sex with Silver, he almost strangled her and seemed to be doing various things that sort of toyed with what it would take to become a Strigoi. So it seems to be something he has interest in, maybe because of the hurt he's experiencing. And in fact, in this episode, there's this really interesting scene where the Strigoi are attacking and he literally turns his head to the side to make it easier for the Strigoi to bite him as if he wants to be turned into a Strigoi. And of course, at the last minute, some guardians come in and get rid of the Strigoi and he's saved. But that moment, I think, just epitomizes Jesse Zeklos doesn't want to be living the life that he's living anymore, and he wants out. So I would expect, as we continue with the season, that we're going to see him become more and more volatile and maybe take steps toward actually becoming a Strigoi, because he just seems to be so miserable in the life that he's living and has so much anger. Meanwhile, back at the party, Tatiana is making moves trying to get political supporters. She says she thinks that Guardians should be tested with live Moroi more to make sure they're fit for combat duty, and Mason's dad agrees. We have another case, as I've talked about in previous videos, of really bad parent-child relationships, and yeah, there's a lot of wounding and pain to characters from their relationships with their parents, which I think is part of why it is so nice when we get to see Victor and his family, because they actually have more positive relationships with each other. Although, as we learn later in the episode, Mia is adopted, and even she had some issues with trying to find her birth family and kind of what came out of that. So a very, very common theme throughout this show is these parent wounds of abusive parents, absent parents, parents who are uninvolved or do active harm to their children. And this is just another example of that. The fact that Mason's dad is so much more concerned about his own business priorities and his money, more so than the potential danger his son could be in, from what Tatiana is suggesting, speaks volumes. And in fact, we find out that he has been making a ton of money by moving non-royal Moroi out of villages into relocation centers because of the increased attacks from Strigoi, and because of the lessened availability of Dhampir guardians. They've been taking away their protection and forcibly removing non-royal Moroi from the villages they'd been living in, taking them to these relocation centers, and Mason's dad is making a lot of money off of it. He's another one who's a piece of work, let me tell you. So Rose finds out that Mikhail is from one of these villages that are being relocated, so she requests to be moved to relocation duty instead of just sort of sitting around guarding ballrooms while people are partying. And of course, it turns out that Dimitri is head of command for the relocation. And this is where we finally get this moment where I was like, as soon as we saw that, I was like, oh, this is it. This is it. Like, that relationship is about to heat up. I was not wrong, but we're not there yet. We'll get there. So back home, we had Mia have her punishment. Meanwhile, the old lady grandma feeder that I talked about earlier is back. I just love her. She's sort of like this wise counsel almost, has a chat with Christian. And then Mia asks Christian to teach her magic. And that is really interesting because I think, like I said earlier, Mia undergoing this really intense penance for what she did against Zeklos, I think is opening her eyes to the unfairness of the system and making her more willing to push back against boundaries and do things that were not expected. So this leads into a series of scenes where she and Christian practice magic together, and I kind of love it. They have this beautiful blossoming friendship, which I am here for, and they kind of open up to each other, share their vulnerable past about having parents who were absent for different reasons. And Christian tells Mia, you learn to control the magic so that it doesn't control you. I really like this friendship that's developing between the two of them. Now, earlier I mentioned there was a Strigoi attack, and in that process, Meredith was injured. So she is flown back to St. Vladimir's. Mia finds out about it, and she rushes off to go and see her. And then we get, oh my God, like, I was just like living for it. We get a kiss between Mia and Meredith, and we get these lovely scenes between the two of them, and I, like, my little bisexual heart was just so happy. I love it so much. I love their relationship. I also love that we're seeing a softer side to Mia, especially in the conversations that she had with Christian leading up to this scene. She's really letting down some of her walls and opening up, and I feel like that is allowing her to begin this relationship with Meredith, and I just love it. I love it so much. It's great. Leading up to the kiss, there's this moment where Meredith is concerned about Mia because of the marks that she sees on her hands. And she says, I don't care, not if it means protecting you. I'm just like, the swoon-worthy moments in this episode are really good. So for the rest of the episode, there's basically 3 main plot threads that we're gonna be following. We have Dimitri and Rose, which we will talk about. We have Lissa and what she goes off to do. And then we have the political stuff with Victor and Tatiana and Sonia. So I'm going to start there. We're going to start by talking about what happens with the politics of this, what happens with Sonia, because there's some really interesting things, and then we'll move through the other 2 to round out the episode. I knew this was going to be a long episode, man. Like, a lot happened in this. So the first significant thing is we have this moment where Sonia has been having the blackness show up in her eyes, and then she notices this almost dark veiny bruise type thing spreading from her chest up her neck. So the darkness is spreading, something is changing, and not for the better. So of course after this, she goes to a party, they're kind of in a bar situation, and Tatiana comes up to her and is such a bitch. She is incredibly cruel in what she says. Knowing that Sonia had been in a relationship with Mikhail, she is basically like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's my fault. We should have known he was unfit for field duty. And she calls him an incompetent fighter and tries to act like she's being helpful and like, oh, it probably helps to remember him that way, instead of what he really was, an incompetent fighter. I mean, like, peak cruelty in this scene. I was pissed on Sonia's behalf, not surprised that she was as well. And then to top it off, Tatiana starts making public statements about Victor. She says, our faith is the foundation of our society, and Victor is just playing at faith. His own daughter's lover betrayed us by turning into a Strigoi. I mean, when I tell you my jaw dropped, I, like, what an awful thing to say, and the idea that it's purposeful betrayal, Mikhail turning into a Strigoi, oh my god. Tatiana is horrible. I mean, like, excellently acted, I've got to say. Like, the actress playing her, like, she is doing a great job, but this was awful. And, you know, unsurprisingly, Sonia is not having it. She turns dark, her eyes get black, her fangs drop, she gets this, like, feral look on her face, and she rushes at Tatiana trying to attack her. And that moment I was like, oh my god. But also that's the moment where I'm like, it's all over for Victor, politically speaking. Tatiana is probably going to be queen, and it is going to be a shit show. Like, I am so scared for everything that's going to happen, because I don't know how Victor can come back from this with the way the press is playing it. But Sonia wakes up in a hospital bed, and her dad says he's going to get her help. What does that mean? I don't know. So yeah, that whole plot thread was wild. I really feel for Sonia. I kind of hate Tatiana, and I'm really worried for where things are going to go politically. Meanwhile, Lissa is on her own kind of journey into darkness, perhaps we say. As much as she was like, I'm not going to use compulsion on anyone. Honestly, it reminds me of the meme going around TikTok where it's like, I'm not going to do it, girl. I was just thinking about it. Like, if you've seen that, it's this like sound going around on TikTok and shorts and stuff. And I feel like this is Lissa with using compulsion, where she's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to use it on anyone. Oh, wait, no, I am. I'm going to, and then once I start, I'm going to keep doing it.
Girl, don't do it. It's not worth it. I'm not gonna do it, girl. I was just thinking about it. I'm not gonna do it. I did it.
So she uses compulsion on Jesse to make him leave her alone because she doesn't like how he's treating her. Then right after that, she receives an invitation to this party that she wanted to go to. She shows up at this party, and while in her mind, as she actually tells us, she was imagining an older guy who's really nerdy, art collector, professorial type. It turns out that Adrian is actually this young playboy dude, and she was not expecting that. Also, I expect that Adrian might be the person that creates a love triangle for Lissa. While I kind of hope Christian is endgame, I'm not 100% sure, and I don't really trust Adrian. I think she's going to be into him because he knows so much about what she can do. So he walks in, he's his like playboy self. She wants a tour of his art collection, and he's like, sorry, I don't do tours, but I can get you a drink. So she uses compulsion on him. And that moment I found really interesting because he's like, say that again? And she does. And he's like, it's your lucky day. I guess I do have one tour in me. And I thought to myself, I don't think it worked. I think he knows she was using compulsion and he's still purposely giving her a tour. And I was right. That was exactly what was going on. So he takes her on a tour. He's got these kind of interesting panels of Saint Vladimir, one of Saint Vladimir entering somebody's dream, which is interesting. New piece of magic lore that we weren't familiar with, that spirit users can apparently enter other people's dreams. And then sort of the central piece of the panels he's trying to collect ends up being Saint Vladimir with the darkness showing kind of on his skin, the way that we saw it starting to look for Sonia earlier in the episode. Very interesting. After that, they go off, get drinks. Lissa gets so high that it immediately knocks her out. She's sleeping, has kind of this weird thing. And then we realize, oh, she's in a dream. And Adrian is in her dream talking to her. And lo and behold, he too is a spirit user. So that's a really interesting plot development for Lissa. I feel like she's getting set up to learn a lot more about her ability. But like I said, I don't really trust Adrian. I do think that he's going to end up being a potential love interest for her. We're going to get kind of a love triangle there, but I don't know where exactly this is going to go. And lastly, the thing that I know you all have been waiting for, we're going to talk about Rose and Dimitri. But first, we have to get there by talking about the whole plot thread of what happens with them in this episode. I mentioned that Rose had been asked to be put on relocation duty. They agree. Dimitri is in charge of her. So they go to Mikhail's village. She's there because she wants to ask forgiveness. And it turns out his sister wants nothing to do with her. She's pissed, understandably. And the dad is on his deathbed. He is about to die and doesn't want to go to relocation center. He wants to die peacefully in his home. The dad is really kind to Rose and they have this great conversation. What's interesting is that it turns out the dad is Moroi, but he, in an unusual turn of events, decided to raise his Damphir kids himself instead of having some random commune raise them. And I think for Rose, who experienced so much abandonment and loss from her parents, that is kind of pivotal, that there is another way to do things, that things don't have to be the way that they are, that there could be better family and more kindness in the world than the way their society is currently structured. Dimitri and Rose's orders are to forcibly remove the family, but Rose is like, no, I want to let him die in peace. You can't force me to do this. And she says, I'm done following the orders of people who don't put me first. Now, you might remember that in my discussion of episode 5, I was saying, I want the Guardians to wake the hell up. I want them to realize how they're being used, how not okay it is, and form some kind of resistance. And I feel like in this episode, we're seeing the seeds of that. We're seeing the groundwork laid for that to happen. This conversation between Rose and Dimitri, I think, is really pivotal to that, because after she says, I'm done following orders of people who don't put me first, Dimitri is like, I have to. Guardians follow orders or else the system crumbles. And Rose's response is, the system is broken. And she's not wrong. The system is broken. And I think this is the time where we see Dimitri begin to have this dawning realization of the brokenness of the system that he has kind of committed his life to. I think what's really interesting is that Dimitri grew up in the communes. He grew up in a really unstable environment where he needed structure and craved structure. And he found that in the Guardians following orders. And that is what he feels like he needs to keep his life together. But again, I think his eyes are starting to be opened to the ways that it's not okay, it's harmful, it's a messed up system, and maybe he shouldn't be so committed to upholding it. Later on, there's this moment where Dimitri says to Rose, "You're hurting and I would do anything to make it stop." I'm like, oh, like, okay. Like, listen, this episode we get some real good swoon-worthy scenes between Dimitri and Rose, and I gotta say at this point, I am really, really rooting for their relationship, and I'm loving seeing the development between the two of them. I think they work. I think they have a lot of chemistry on screen. The way it's being portrayed is great. So we had found out that Mikhail's dad is on his last legs. He probably won't survive the night, and so they're trying to make it possible for him to stay there for the night, knowing that the Strigoi are going to attack once darkness falls. Rose and Dimitri are outside to protect the house. We get this really great shot of them fighting back to back, and I love the way that this show is setting them up as partners who are kind of equally powerful, equally supporting each other. Rose has a lot of independence, and even though he's kind of superior to her, it doesn't feel that uneven to me. I think the show is doing a pretty good job of creating more balanced power dynamics between the two of them that makes the relationship feel like it could really work. After the death of the father and after fighting the Strigoi together, Rose and Sasha have this great moment of reconciliation where they do kind of like the shoe tap that Rose used to do with Mikhail. It's like a sweet moment. And then the next day, Dimitri's like, okay, we got to turn Sasha in. And Rose is like, she's gone. I told her to run. And he's like, oh my God, you know what they'll do to her? What they'll do to you if they find out? He's like freaking out. And she's like, yeah, I don't care. She's like, she deserves better. We all do. And Dimitri has this like, let me think about that. Maybe you're right sort of face. And in fact, what ends up happening is that Dimitri lies and says that she had died during the Strigoi attack. We see Dimitri more and more starting to step outside of the lines that have been drawn for him. And I would be thrilled to see a rebellion against the way that society is set up, because it is really, really harmful to a lot of people. So then, of course, we get the scene that everybody's been waiting for. And it was pretty hot, I've got to say. Dimitri finally gives Rose her first molnia. She had had this conversation with Mikhail's dad where he had asked to see it, and she was like, I couldn't do it. And he was like, no, you should. It celebrates his life, not the monster he became. He would do the same for you. And so she finally has decided to get it. So in a private ceremony, Dimitri gives it to her, and then they just make that hella sexy, basically, with him like blowing on her neck and putting ice on it. And then there's this like long, drawn out, tension filled moment of them like looking into each other's eyes, and you know what's coming. And I was like living for the tension and the buildup of that moment. Like it was so good. And then that kiss, man, like that kiss went hard. Like you even see a little bit of tongue action there. Like, whew, we do fade to black. So, you know, who knows where it went exactly, but that is the end of the episode. And like, that was some kiss, man. I am loving a lot of what's happening with the relationships. I am on edge about a lot of the politics. I thought this was a fantastic episode. A lot to unpack. I don't know how long this is going to be when I edit it, but I've been talking for more than 40 minutes. So wow, there was a lot to say, but I'm really into it. I'm so excited to see what's going to come next in the show. I feel like some of it maybe is going to be devastating, but I think the way they're doing the romances is excellent. Whew. So I will be back probably in a few days to talk about the next episode once it drops, and we are now caught up, which is exciting. So I'll just be reviewing new episodes as they release. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts on this episode. What did you think? Were you prepared for all of the heat and the relationships? What do you think about the political situation and what's going on? Talk to me in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.